from various locations, and injects them and injects their dependencies into application, index their dependencies into application at build and compile, build and runtime. That means app module.ts, it imports all components, services, modules and pipes from various locations and injects their dependencies into application at build or runtime. That means here, whatever you want to use for your application, first you have to import them. So that means currently our application requires Angular core library. So that is imported. In Angular core library, we need a class ng module, that is also imported. This syntax you are aware of. You are not new with this syntax, you know. Similarly, browser module. So it is required for loading your application and supporting on browser. Similarly, one component is ready. That component is add component, right? Whatever you want to use for your application, you built it, but they need to be initialized into this app module.cs, app module.ts. So every module, every component, every service that you create for your application, first you have to import it here. After importing, that means the first line is import. After importing, so second point, you have to register. You have to register your components. You have to register your components and services and pipes. You have to register your components, services and pipes. Where to register? You imported them first. After importing, you have to register. You have to register them. You have to register component pipes in metadata. That means in ng module. That means after importing the components, so you have to, after importing the components, you have to register. So you have to register the components and services and pipes, right? Now the point is where that means two steps are there. One is first import them. After importing them, register them. So once you register, then you can start using. Without registering, you cannot use them. And important, where to register? You can see this ng module is having several metadata. It's having a lot of metadata. In the ng module metadata, you can observe this is the syntax, right? In the ng module metadata, you can see this is ng module metadata. I will just give the syntax here. In this declarations is nothing but your components and pipes are registered here. That means whatever the components and pipes you want to use, they must be registered in declarations. You may be wondering what is pipe. Actually, pipe is a concept which is used for filtering, sorting and formatting our data. So Angular contains pipes which are used for filtering, sorting and formatting the data. And the component are the building blocks that we will see step by step detailing. So in ng module, declarations is the location where you have to register your components and pipes. all our components and pipes are registered in declarations. Your modules must be registered. Your modules are registered here. 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 That means whatever the modules you want to use in your application, those modules are registered here. So importing the modules, registering the modules, importing the components, registering the components. Components are registered in declarations, modules are registered in imports, and services are registered in providers. Your services are registered here. Your services are registered here. So remember, they are all array. Array means they can contain a collection of many items. All your components, all your modules, all your providers must be registered. Remember, you added some components into your project. You added the components into your project. You imported them here, but you haven't registered them, or you are not importing them and you are trying to use them. If anything is not defined in app module, they will never work. Automatically, if you are trying to use them without importing and without registering, then it will throw an error saying that the component you are trying to use is not registered. Your component doesn't contains a importing is not defined. Import of component is not defined in app module. It has to do that. Right. So that means the point here is declarations contains the registration of components. Imports contains the registration of modules. Providers contains registration of services. Currently, there are no services defined. And here comes an important part, Bootstrap. Bootstrap, it specifies the startup component. It specifies the startup component. And remember, this is one important point you have to be careful. This is not Bootstrap that generally you know in CSS. Bootstrapping is different actually. Why it is called Bootstrap? So what is Bootstrap actually? Actually, in order to understand the Bootstrap, we need to go very in depth about the architecture, how Angular application compiles. We need to go into the architecture where we have to tell how Angular application actually compiles. So I will give you an overview because that entire architecture you will able to understand towards the end, right? So I will give you towards the end because it contains a very low level architecture internally. What happens we need to understand. Actually, what is the meaning of the word bootstrap? So what is bootstrapping? Actual point is, see, technically what happens is, I will tell you, technically what happens is, we defined an Angular application. We have an Angular application. We defined an Angular application. This Angular application is loaded into browser. It is loaded into browser. When it loaded into browser, first what happens? It loads static DOM, document object model, because it comprises of your pages, right? First it loads the static DOM. After loading the static DOM, then lot of process will happen. Then what will happen? Your library will load. Your library loads. After library is loading, that means your components are compiled.